And we want to welcome you to our event on multifamily for this next code cycle, because this next code cycle is definitely going to be interesting with the major changes going on. So we're going to speak of the next code cycle, which is the 2022 energy code cycle that goes into effect that projects go for permit as of January 1st of 2023. So as we're getting towards the end of this year, all of you have to really think hard. Are we going to get in before the end of the year? Are we going to make sure our building department is open? Are we designing to this code cycle? Are we designing to the next code cycle? Because there is going to be major differences. So please be cognizant of all the work on your desk, all the contracts that you have coming in, and make the decision as a team. Are we going to work like crazy to get something into the building department before the end of the year? Or are we going to be just adopt and just do it just for 2022? So there's some major changes to how the multifamily code sections are being supported in the energy code, which we're going to review. And we're going to concentrate on the measures associated with electrification and electric ready and electric mechanical equipment and our renewable systems. There are a lot more changes to multifamily than what we'll be covering in this 1-hour session. There's some major changes going on for envelope requirements that are going to affect you, the architect. And I would strongly suggest there are some resources I'm going to be talking about at the end that you're going to want to get your hands on to get up to speed on this. At Energy Code ACE, if you have not gone to our website before, I'm hoping you will. We have 3 buckets. We have tools, we have training, and we have resources. So in our tool bucket, the most important one right now is reference ACE. We have a reference ACE that's per code cycle. And right now, if you go to our reference ACE, this is how you can get an online version of the code language. IECC did just come out with a printed version on July 11th. I'm pretty sure that's when it went live for the entire US, because it was the entire building code. But if you want to get your hands on electronic version, that would be through Energy Code ACE's reference ACE. There are some other great tools here to help regarding compliance. Another one you might be interested in is our Q&As, where we take questions that are asked of from the industry and we put those answers in there so you can find what were other people asking and what were those vetted answers that were provided. We are in the process of updating all of our training for the 2022 code cycle, and I'll be highlighting towards the end classes that might be useful for you specifically. And when I talk about resources, these are fact sheets, they're PDFs, they're various resources that are very topic dependent. Single family envelope, multifamily envelope. And we have our fact sheets that we come out at the beginning of each code cycle available for 2022 that are highlight when we get towards the end of our session. Everything on our website is at no cost because it's paid for by you, the ratepayers of California. So thank you about that. So don't worry about any additional costs that might be accrued by coming to our website, because everything at our website is at no cost. So some of the basics. So we talked about this a little bit already, that what we're talking about now is applicable to projects that submit for permit as of January 1st of 2023. And as you're getting close to the end of this year, be very, very conscious about, did you mean to submit this year? Are you a little bit late and it might be next year? And when it comes to December, make sure your building department is open and able to take your application so that you can be locked into the code cycle of your choice. The Energy Commission has a section on their website devoted just to the 2022 materials that is pretty beefed up at this point. A couple of weeks ago, I couldn't say that, but now they have a lot of information there. So let's talk about what's going on in terms of reorganization. So this is the biggest reorganization efforts that have ever been done to the Energy Code since, oh my gosh, really honestly, since the beginning. Since the beginning, we have had 2 major sections of the code. We've had a code section that applies to single family and low-rise multifamily buildings. And then we've had the other sections of code that applied to hotel, motel, high-rise multifamily, that's 4 habitable stories or greater, or non-residential occupancies. So what they've done is they're taking the low-rise residential, 3 habitable stories or less, and the high-rise multifamily for habitable stories or greater, and putting them in their own set of chapters. We have 3 brand new chapters we've never had before. 160, which is the mandatory requirements for multifamily, 170, the prescriptive requirements for multifamily, and 180, how the rules change for additions and alterations for multifamily. If we have a mixed occupancy building that is both non-res, let's say the first floor is retail, and multifamily, the rest of the building is an R occupancy multifamily, then we have to be aware of the fact that the multifamily R occupancy requirements are going to be in the 160, 170, 180, but that non-residential occupancy, the retail occupancy, is going to be subject to the same chapters as it is now, the 120s through the 140s. So this is a pretty big change. There's software changes, there's form changes, lots of infrastructure changes supporting this new reorganization of the code. So some of the major concepts of the code that everyone needs to be aware of is mandatory measures. Mandatory measures, we use the symbol of the gavel on everything we do at Energy Code ACE to help identify this is mandatory, in which you, the design professional, is to be aware of what those mandatory requirements are and make sure that your design incorporates those features at a minimum. There's no trading away mandatory measures. There's no flexibility with mandatory measures. Mandatory measures are the same for all 16 climate zones in California and is the same for all scopes of work, new construction, additions, alterations, because these were found to be cost effective all the time, everywhere, because our energy code is based on cost effectiveness. Layered on top of mandatory measures are prescriptive measures, which we use the prescription sign, we'll play on words there, to identify prescriptive measures. Now, prescriptive measures could be a compliance pathway, typically not used for new construction envelope design, just not a standard practice. But the prescriptive measures typically set the baseline for when we use the performance calculation. What you're being compared to is going to be the prescriptive measures. Prescriptive measures are changed based on scope of work. You will not have the same prescriptive requirements typically for new construction, the least expensive time to incorporate energy efficiency measures, versus additions and alterations. It's more expensive. It also is going to change based on climate zone. Is it a heating climate zone? Is it a cooling climate zone? Is it an extreme climate zone like climate zone 10 or climate zone 14 where we have extreme heating and cooling? All of that's taken into consideration for those measures. And when it's a prescriptive measure, we have the ability to use the performance approach for flexibility if it's state approved software, of which we identify with the scales here, because it's all about, you want to trade away something, you don't want to put rigid on the walls, great. What are you going to do that's equal energy savings that's going to allow you to do that? The other thing to be aware of with the performance approach is that we are going to have a new measurement. So currently we measure TDV energy, time dependent value. What time are you using the energy? Time of day matters. Time of the year matters. Peak use conditions matters. Are you using heating energy, cooling energy? Is there a load on the grid? All of that's taken into consideration in terms of time. It's also dependent upon where, in which that climate zone, and are you using a lot of air conditioning because you're in an area that's really hot throughout the summertime? That's looked at. And that V is the value. What energy source are you using? And what's the cost associated with that source? In part dependent upon what time of day, is it peak use conditions? All of it is integrated. They're adding source energy. Source energy is a new metric that is going to be associated with a carbon footprint proxy. Is the energy source you're using, does it have any transmission issues of which it has a carbon footprint? What happens when it's on site? So hopefully you could see we have natural propane gas where there are transmission issues and we're burning it and generating a carbon footprint at the building, the source energy associated with natural gas or propane gas is going to be penalized versus an electric source or a renewable source on site. Renewable sources on site are going to get almost bonus points when we're looking at our source energy. So for the first time, we're going to have source energy that has to pass on its own. You don't get to trade better windows towards source energy. You're going to have building efficiency measured in TDV, and you're going to have a renewable bucket, which is going to be all about PV and battery. So there's been a lot of questions here going on about what is that definition of low rise versus high rise. So low rise is 3 habitable stories or less, which is currently now in a separate code section. But in the 2022 code section, that low rise 3 habitable stories or less and high rise 4 habitable stories or more are all going to be in one place. And there were unification measures that were trying to make the code requirements for both low rise and high rise, of which in this next code cycle, we're calling 3 stories or less, or 4 stories or more, are going to be very similar. So some changes to how we look at those buildings and how we figure out how does the code apply. Okay, I have a question for you guys, if you wouldn't mind answering in the chat. What do you think? What is that enforcement of the new energy code starting as of what date? As of what date will that local building department or local authority having jurisdiction be subject to the job having to meet the 2022 code cycle? Excellent, everyone. That's going to be January 1st of 2023 is when this next code cycle will apply for the project. Got to tell you, I have a lot of clients who are like, Gina, we're going to do anything we can do to get something into the building department before January 1st. But my concern is if they miss the date, if it really might be too aggressive for the design team, these discussions have to happen now. Okay, and why? Well, let's dive into why. So electric ready. Electric ready is when you're putting in natural or propane gas appliances, whether it's a furnace, whether it's a cooktop, whether it's a dryer. And because you're putting in gas equipment, you are going to put in the infrastructure for a future heat pump or all electric choice. So the energy code is not saying you can't do gas. So a lot of people are misunderstanding that. There are some REACH code cities that say you can't do gas, and that's a local city deciding to go that direction. But for state code is encouraging going all electric, but you still have choices whether you really want to have your appliances be electric or gas. Being aware that if you choose gas, electric ready will be required for these applications. So let's talk about what those electric ready requirements are. So a furnace. If you put in a gas central or wall furnace type in the dwelling units, this does not apply to those systems serving the common use areas of the R occupancy, such as the corridors, the lobbies, the leasing offices, et cetera, that are under the R occupancy but are not dwelling units. So this is dwelling unit specific. If you put in that gas piece of equipment in the dwelling unit, which will not apply to duplexes. Duplexes across the board, I don't care how high they are considered single family. So there's some new definitions in the energy code also. So I would also get your hands on that 2022 code and read the definition for multifamily, read the definition for single family, because they have changed. And the definition for single family is a single family home, an accessory dwelling unit to a single family property, a duplex of any size, and a townhome of any size. Current code, a townhome 3 stories, habitable stories or less is subject to the low rise requirements. 4 stories or more is high rise. Guess what? In the next code cycle, they said for townhomes, we don't care how high it is. It's going to be single family. So duplexes, townhomes of any size, single family homes, accessory dwelling units on a single family property will be single family and be in a completely different bucket than anything we're going to define as multifamily. I put in that gas furnace, I will have to also make sure is designed and installed a 240 volt branch circuit wiring within 3 feet of the furnace, and it's accessible. You can't block it off with cabinetry, etc. It has to be available, and that wiring has to be installed. I've got a lot of questions on, is this the conduit? No, this is the actual wiring, and 208 volt is not what they're asking for. They're asking for 240 volt. It also has to be a 30 amp service to that branch circuit. The conductor needs to be 30 amp. That's pretty beefy. And you have to make that at that branch circuit and that electrical panel that is serving this particular electric ready area, that it is reserved for a future 240 volt appliance. At the main electrical panel that's serving this area or this dwelling unit, you will also additionally have to have reserved a double pole circuit breaker for this future 240 volt service to the appliance. Let's say you want to put in a gas or propane cooktop. Great. What you're also going to do is put in the infrastructure for a future electric resistance or induction stovetop, which will be a dedicated 240 volt branch circuit within 3 feet with no obstructions. Now you're going to put in a 50 amp branch circuit. So if you decided to go with a gas furnace and a gas cooktop, that's a 30 amp plus a 50 amp. These are not, these are separate from each other. You don't get to reserve one and say, okay, they might do either a furnace or a gas stovetop. Each of these will have its own branch circuits and wiring. And at that main service panel serving the dwelling unit, another double pole circuit breaker for the future electric cooktop. So Sarah's asking, per 2022 definitions, is it correct to assume townhomes designed within a multifamily development can be designed with the single family requirements? Yes. If it is a townhome building, it is subject to the single family requirements of the 2022 code cycle. I've got one of those projects on my desk right now where 10 of the buildings are townhome buildings and 4 of the buildings are multifamily buildings. And then when I look at those multifamily buildings, I'm looking at the number of habitable floors, where the townhomes, it doesn't matter. It's going to meet the single family requirements. So if I'm going to put in a gas dryer or a gas connection that can be used at the dryer location, let's say you're not installing the dryer, you're putting that infrastructure in, you're going to, I'm sure this will be shocking, put in a dedicated 240 volt branch circuit wiring within 3 feet of that closed dryer location that has no obstructions and is accessible. You're going to do another 30 amp branch circuit conductor, and you're going to have another double pole circuit breaker in that main electrical panel serving the dwelling unit. Now this one's unique. This is if you want to put in gas dryers or the gas infrastructure for a central or common laundry facility, whether it be within the building or a separate building. I don't care if it's a laundry building. I don't care if it's laundry facilities within the multifamily building. If it is serving more than one dwelling unit and it's not systems within the dwelling unit, now I look at what's the capacity of that laundry facility. Because here I'm going to do that 240 volt branch circuit of each dryer location. And then I'm going to look at, for the branch circuit conductors, what is the capacity of the closed drying going on in the space, or the capacity of that gas piping system. And I am going to have to make sure the electrical capacity is available to meet the equivalent of the gas dryer capacity. This is a big deal when we're sizing our transformers and we're sizing our electrical rooms to serve these buildings and serve these properties. When we pair this on top of the requirements that are going on for CalGreen and EV charging, we're getting more and more and more electric capacity needs to be available at the building, whether I'm using it now or I'm reserving it for the future, such as these electric ready requirements. And I know that's causing a lot of heartache for some people on what's going on in terms of the design consideration to the electrical system. So I have a question for you guys. Which of these is going to require a double pole circuit breaker in the main electrical panel serving the dwelling unit? You could put your answers in the chat. Yeah, that's going to be D, all of the above. For a furnace for the cooktop. And if you decide to put in a gas dryer or gas dryer infrastructure, you will have to do all of the above. And I totally get it what you guys are saying about, you know, the utility stuff regarding these electrical services is getting more and more complex. I work here in the Bay Area up in Northern California, and we're having the issues that our floodplains are getting lower and lower and lower. And like in San Francisco, they're not allowing transformers below grade, below the water level. So it's becoming even more difficult about where are we going to put these transformers. They're getting bigger and bigger. And what is it doing to the design and potentially the available parking and available units and rentable area we have associated with our buildings. So let's talk about PV. So what I want to start with is a reminder of what the PV requirements are for single family. So we've just talked about how townhomes of any size and duplexes and single family are subject to the single family requirements. We already have PV requirements for those buildings. And we look at the conditioned floor area of the dwelling unit spaces to determine our PV KW that's dictated by the space heating, the space cooling requirements of the dwelling unit. We don't look at space heating. We don't look at water heating. I don't care if they're electric. I'm only looking at what is the electric use for the cooling systems and some of the appliances such as the stovetop and or the dryer. Let's talk about what's going on for multifamily now and PV. One of the things they've changed for this next code cycle are some of the rules and formulas behind being able to be approved as a community shared solar and or battery system. Currently, right now, the only place we have a community shared solar system is in the SMUD territory, that's in the Sacramento area. I'm really looking forward to seeing if maybe some of the clarification and updates they made to the rules behind being able to be approved by the Energy Commission to be a community shared system might allow some more flexibility and have us have more community share systems. Let's think about a multifamily site in which we have a lot of parking or this and that and so forth, and we want to put all the PV for all the buildings on the site that are being built now and in the future. We're phasing in things. We want to put it all in the parking lot. That's a community shared system because it's going to meet future needs and would have to be approved as a community shared system. Any PV installed at the same time as the buildings being permitted can be put anywhere on the property. They don't have to be on the buildings. The only reason it would have to be community shared is because if we want to build in sizing and infrastructure for phased in future work that is not under the same permit. Okay, Sarah, this is a new key phrase that all of us need to be aware of, not only for single family, not only for low-rise multifamily, but also for high-rise multifamily and all other new construction in California, because these requirements are not only going to be specific to residential as they are in the current code. There are new PV and battery requirements for a heck of a lot more building types in California, new construction only. So that's one thing to keep saying in your head, new construction only, new construction only. And Sarah is the solar access roof area available of the building. We're used to thinking about that already with our low-rise multifamily. What do I have available on the roof for this project? But what's new is the second bullet here, and all roofs of covered parking, carports, or any other newly constructed structure on the property that is under the same permit. I'm looking at the whole site. What can handle PV? What structures on the site can handle PV, including any carports or covered parking areas? And I look at that as how much PV can I put on the property? I'm not just looking at the roof anymore. I'm going to exclude any area of my roof or any other roofs or structures on the property that doesn't have an annual solar access greater than 70%. But this is something you don't get to guess on this. You have to use a CEC approved solar access tool to determine whether you have that annual solar access. I know that myself as an energy consultant, we are going to be doing solar access reports on every single new building we get in our office, as a matter of fact. And I would suggest potentially for all of your new buildings, you're going to be doing the same thing. Who are you going to get? Who's going to do that at design so that you could design in the appropriate amount of PV in the right locations? You do not have to put PV in any areas that are to be occupied as dictated by the California Building Code. That's not the planning departments. That's not because, well, they don't have enough open space on the property, so we have to do it on the roof. There's some limitations of when we're talking about that occupied roof per the building code. This last bullet is a little squishy. Any roof area that's otherwise not available because it's needed to meet requirements of other building code requirements. Can anyone think of examples of that? What else in the building code is using and needs some of our roof area? What do you guys think? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What? HVAC, that has been a common question, and that's one we don't know yet. Mechanical equipment. Just because you want to use a split DX system that has a huge footprint on that roof, that was your choice. That wasn't a code requirement. Now, once you have that mechanical equipment there and you need to have access to that equipment, that's a code requirement. So access to the mechanical equipment will be exempt. Facade access will be exempt. Fire department access will be exempt. PV access and PV clearances per the fire code will be exempt. Open space, it depends on whether that was dictated by the building code or not. If it was dictated by a planning agreement or because of how you were meeting, let's say LEED, et cetera, and so forth, maybe not. So vapor vent stacks, you could have done a different methodology. I see a lot of people where they've got little vents going all over the place and they could have piped them so that I only have one penetration. So what we don't quite know yet is mechanical equipment footprint. You could have used a VRF system and minimized your footprint for your mechanical system tremendously. That was your choice. And that's kind of a, hey, that's dictating what is available for PV, not just future PV, for PV. Skylights are exempt. So I do remove any areas of my roof that are skylights. So we are expecting the Energy Commission to come out with a blueprint. That's a quarterly newsletter that the Energy Commission comes out that gives us clarification on code throughout a code cycle. If you are not signed up through the CEC for their quarterly newsletter called the Blueprint, please do so now. And they are planning on putting out a blueprint really soon on this last bullet item, what they're saying the executive director, which is the Energy Commission, is going to say ahead of time. This is a list of what we already know we are saying is not available because of other building code requirements. And if there's anything not on our list, then you'll have to come to us, the Energy Commission, and get it approved for your specific project. The executive director is not your local authority having jurisdiction, your building departments. It is the Energy Commission. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that blueprint. There are not many choices in affordable housing. Unfortunately, affordable housing isn't something that they gave any exceptions to. Hey, use the cheapest equipment possible because it's low income housing. That is not something that they supported. I'm hoping that on that list, they'll say equipment footprint, a mechanical equipment footprint, whether it's HVAC or water heating. But I just don't know that yet. That's one of those, I'm not quite sure where they're going to go in terms of that. Stair access, 100% exempt. That is not part of the SARA, okay? So you could see as designers, you're starting to pick apart your roof and all other roofs of structures on the property. Now, this particular formula for PV has not changed. This is the same exact formula we use now for low-rise multifamily, and it will be the same exact formula we use for low-rise multifamily, or what will now be called 3 habitable stories or less in the 2022 code cycle, where we're going to take the conditioned floor area of the dwelling unit only, apply a formula that takes into account my climate zone 100% matters, and how many dwelling units matters. So I take a factor that takes into account my conditioned floor area of the dwelling unit times a number based on my climate zone. And then I also add another factor that is dependent upon climate zone. You'll see all of these numbers differ. And the reason all of these numbers differ is to take into consideration how much space cooling is needed for these climate zones by how many dwelling units that you have. Now, there was an exception saying PV is not required for 4 stories or greater. That exception has been removed because PV is required for those buildings now. They have tweaked the exceptions slightly. So we still have the exception saying if you can show with a approved solar access tool that you don't have at least 80 contiguous square feet all in one place that has that annual solar access that exceeds 70% over the course of the entire year. If you don't have at least 80 contiguous square feet, you're exempt from the energy code requirements of PV. And this is when you would then have to meet the solar ready requirements. I don't want anyone to think the solar ready requirements or exceptions applies to PV. I have been told over and over again, I don't have to do PV for this building because my multifamily building's over 10 stories and that's exempt. No, that's an exemption to solar ready. That is not an exemption to PV in the 2022 code cycle. They are not the same. If you figure out that your required PV is less than 1.8 kWdc, you don't have to do PV. I doubt that's ever going to apply to a multifamily building. Can anyone think of what building type might have that little PV? What type of buildings do we work on that have that little teeny bit of PV required by the energy code? It's a little teeny PV system. Storage, the PV requirements only apply to conditioned spaces, so it would depend on if that's a conditioned storage space or not, which almost always, then they're huge. Exactly, Gregory and Isabel, it's going to be accessory dwelling units. They built that new exception into 2022 for yes, and if you are doing a conditioned doghouse, which I know it's crazy, I have had projects on my desk this last couple of years of conditioned doghouses. So it is truly a thing. But yeah, that's when we're seeing that it's such a small footprint, it's such a small load that it's not meeting the cost effectiveness associated with the energy code requirements. That's a brand new exception, eagerly looking forward to using that for accessory dwelling units. This snow load exception, this is if it's determined by the local authority having jurisdiction that there are structural integrity issues as supporting the structural code requirements for snow loads, and then they need to post how those PV exceptions apply in their area. I've seen this in South Lake Tahoe. I've seen this in Truckee. There aren't a lot of building departments that have gone through this whole process of snow load exception. And then it won't apply the entire city. It applies to specific areas of their city or county. This was introduced as an executive directive in the 2019 code cycle. And for 2022, they built it into the energy code. So this isn't new, but it's newly written into the energy code. You can still reduce your PV sizing if you choose to add battery. For multifamily buildings, 3 stories, 3 habitable stories or less, battery is still a choice. I'm going to say that again. For habitable 3 stories or less multifamily buildings, battery is a choice and you can use it to reduce your PV sizing. I have never found that work for me. I use the battery to trade building features requirements such as insulation and other various things. I have yet to use it to reduce the PV system because you just don't get 25%. Woohoo, who cares? 25% is a drop in the bucket when you're talking about these large systems you need for low-rise multifamily buildings. So now let's clear out what we just said, get it all out of your head, because now we're going to talk about multifamily buildings, new construction of 4 habitable stories or more. And this is a brand new requirement of which PV will be required for these building types. The formula is different. In fact, I have 3 formulas. I have one formula where I'm taking the conditioned floor area of the entire building, not just the dwelling units. So it's the entire conditioned floor area, the common use areas, the lobbies, etc., everything that is conditioned. And I'm going to multiply it times a factor that's based on climate zone. So let's look at this table down here, and we'll see that I have a different climate zone for my milder climate zones 1, 3, 5, and 16. They don't have that much cooling versus my climate zones that have more cooling, climate zones 2, 4, 6 through 14. And a climate zone that has so much cooling, it ain't even funny, climate zone 15, that's where it's desert. You can see these factors are different. The hotter the climate zone, the more PV that's going to be required, because it's the main purpose behind it is to offset air conditioning loads at peak use conditions. I'm also going to calculate the SARA. I'm going to take all that roof area that's not exempt, multiply it times 14 watts, and I'm going to figure out that number. And then my third number is going to be whatever my performance calculation tells me. My performance calculation is going to come up with a third number. So I'm going to do all three of these. I'm going to do all three of these for a reason, okay? Because I'm going to take the lesser of the three. Whatever one indicates is the smallest PV size I need, that's the one required by code. So Lance is asking, multifamily buildings, is the battery storage requirement 7.5 kW per unit? That is when you get to start engaging performance flexibility measures for multifamily buildings 3 habitable stories or less. Ignore that when we start talking about our 4 habitable stories or greater. Louisa's asking, can you touch on historic preservation? Okay, we'll do that towards the end, since that is not really fitting into our topic right now. But what I want you guys to look at is this table. Do you guys see all the building types here? These are all the new construction building types that are subject to PV for the very first time ever. Grocery stores, offices, financial institutions, unleased tenant space buildings. You don't know what's going to go in there? PV required. Retail, schools, warehouses, auditorium, convention centers, hotel, motel buildings, libraries, medical office or clinic buildings, restaurants, and theaters. Who's shocked by this? Did anyone know all this already? They're like, oh, Gina, I already know this. I don't even need to know what you're talking about because I already knew about this. I'm finding this is shocking people. And remember, the solar ready exceptions do not apply to these PV requirements. We already talked about what exceptions apply. Oh, we're about to talk about the exceptions that apply to PV. Okay. How do I do the conditioned floor area calc? Because I'm always going to do that one. I always do this one first. I take the conditioned floor area of the building and figure out my climate zone, get my building type. I do the formula, 182 kW is the smallest PV system I'm going to be allowed to install with this formula, but I have more formulas I have to do. Because now I'm going to use the SARA formula. I'm going to figure out what is that roof area that is really, truly viable for a PV system. I did my whole solar access. I figured out all that stuff I get to exempt because it's needed for other building code requirements. And I multiply that times 14. That is 350 kW. Woo! You're doing the smaller. What I don't have here is the performance calculation because at the time we put this slide deck together, we didn't have the performance software. We do now. I'm finding the performance software number is even smaller than the 182 kW. So that's what I'm saying. You're going to want to do all three. Don't stop with just one because you're doing yourself an injustice and you might not fully understand how PV applies to your building. So by the conditioned floor area formula, do the SARA formula, and you're also going to want to get the performance calculation PV kW number. Here are my exceptions for PV. If your solar access area, it ends up being less than 3% of the entire conditioned floor area. Now, we talked about low income multifamily. Usually, yeah, I do have a lot of equipment up there. I have a lot of things. If I really truly get to exempt out the footprint of the mechanical systems, I might end up that my roof is being so used by other things and there's so much that I can't put anywhere because of all these other code requirements that really honestly, I have less than 3% of the total conditioned floor area available. That might really truly be viable for my smaller multifamily buildings in which I don't have that much roof area. Remembering I have to look at all the roof areas available on the property. I calc out that the system is less than 4 kWdc. I personally don't see that happening for most multifamily buildings, except for maybe a triplex or a fourplex. Because remember, triplex, fourplexes are considered multifamily. So I might use it for that. I still have I don't have at least 80 contiguous square feet with greater than a 70% solar annual access. I need to do that solar study to figure that one out. And I get the snow load exception just like low-rise multifamily buildings do, just like single-family buildings do. So what do you guys think? Which building types are going to have PV requirements in this next code cycle? Which building types are going? Yeah, it's going to be all my multifamily building types. All of them are going to have PV requirements. If it's new construction, if it's an alteration or an addition, no, I do not. So now let's talk about battery. We already had someone eager to have us jump to battery. So we're now going to jump to battery. So for my multifamily buildings, 4 habitable stories or greater, if I figured out I have PV requirements, I wasn't able to find a way out of it, you're also going to have battery storage requirements. In fact, let's look at this table down here on the left. Look at all those building types of which I have battery storage requirements. Oh my gosh, it's the same list I had for PV new to this code cycle. So multifamily buildings, 3 habitable stories or less, battery not required. It's an extra credit measure. It's up to you. 4 stories or greater, if you are able to determine PV is going to be required for your building, PV battery has to be considered. And I look at 2 different measurements to determine my specification for the battery. I'm going to look at the rated energy capacity, and I'm going to look at the power capacity. So the energy capacity is that kWh that is supported by the battery. I take the PV kW, because I have to do PV first, because battery is 100% dependent upon the PV kW that was dictated is needed for your building. So I'm going to take that PV kW number, multiply it times the factor associated with my building type to determine the kWh. So I'm going to take that 182 kW, which I already figured out was my smallest by doing the 2 formulas previously. I still haven't done the performance one. That's the one I haven't talked about yet that you're going to want to do. I'm going to figure out my battery efficiency, which is going to be dependent upon battery type. If you notice, the energy code is not dictating battery technology. It's dictating the battery capacity. So if you use lithium, if you use whatever, you're going to look at what is the battery capacity, the efficiency of whatever you chose. And then that's going to help determine, well, what's the capacity energy factor? 192.3 kWh. Does anyone near here know how big a battery that is? So 182 kW, that's a decent sized PV system. That's what I like to call a medium-sized PV system. It's pretty big. If you're just thinking single family, it's huge. But if you're thinking multifamily, that's medium-sized. Does anyone have a feel of the size of a 192.3 kWh battery? I know I don't. I have to bring in specialists. I have to be bringing in people that this is what they do. So there is a new design professional you're going to want to get on board early on in your project for Tesla Powerwalls. Okay. And then we have requirements to the fire code of the technology being used, where it can go, and what fire suppression systems need to be in play. And your local fire department needs to be aware of the technology going into this building so they can be prepared if there's ever a fire at this building. There are requirements regarding the fire rated walls and location. And are you going to really want this really far away from the main electrical room? No, you don't. You don't want it really far away from the main electrical room. And you've got stuff going on to the PV system too. So there's a lot that needs to be considered about where these batteries are going and where they're located on the site. And what does this size really mean? So if you don't already have a solar battery expert on your design team, now's the time to start interviewing them and finding a team or multiple team members or companies that you feel comfortable using as we all get up to speed on this. So we had only done half of our specification for a battery. The other half is going to be the power capacity, in which I take, oh, it's going to be shocking to you, I know. You're going to take that PV/kW number and you're going to multiply that times the factor associated with your building type. And that's going to be then the second part of your battery specification, the kW sizing associated with that battery. What are the exceptions? And you're like, oh, you should have started with the exceptions, Gina. So if your installed PV system ends up being less than 15% of what was required, now why might that even happen? So I've been playing around with the software, and I've been playing around with multifamily buildings, and I've been able to reduce the required PV/kW number based on building efficiency. The more efficient the building, the less PV you need. And the more I am concerned about reducing that energy use at peak load conditions or that air conditioning load, the smaller my PV requirements are. So if I can put in a system that I have really, with the performance method, ramped it down because of increased building efficiency, I might not have to do battery. I might still have a PV system there, but it's so small now that it's not meeting the energy cost effectiveness evaluation of the energy code. If you do all the calculations as stated, and you get something that says you need something less than 10 kWh of a rated capacity, you do not have to put in that battery system. It's a choice. You'd still have to do the PV, but you wouldn't have to do the battery storage. So what do you guys think? Which types of multifamily buildings are subject to the new battery storage requirements? Which of these building types has to meet the battery storage requirements? We have to at least consider it. Multifamily buildings 4 stories or greater. That's what it's all about. A multifamily building over 50,000 square feet, I have to know what's the number of habitable stories, because that's the trigger. Three habitable stories, I could do this, 3 habitable stories or less, it's a choice. 4 habitable stories or greater, I have to see what that requirement is, and I subject to any of the exceptions. Okay. HVAC and water heating. So there's a lot going on about electrification. And the one thing I'm hearing that just drives me freakishly crazy is when people go, oh, electrification, electric resistance. No, 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 no. Electrification does not mean electric resistance to the energy code. The energy code always looks at energy efficiency, and electric resistance is not always the most energy efficient way when we consider TDV energy, that time dependent evaluation, and is not going to be supported by the energy code. What the energy code is looking for is heat pump technology. And if you don't know what I mean by heat pump technology, if you don't know how to design to heat pump technology, there are some great classes offered through Southern California Edison and other utilities through their workforce and education training program that can help you get up to speed on that. In fact, we'll see if we can have Dave let us know some classes that are being offered soon, maybe supporting heat pump technology. So for 3 habitable stories or less, and this is just for the dwelling units, these requirements do not apply to the common use area equipment, the corridors, the lobbies, the leasing offices. This is just the dwelling units. Climate zone 1 through 15, you are going to be expected to do a heat pump space heating system, or you can use the performance approach and take a penalty for putting in gas, of which then your source energy is going to get all screwy, and you're going to have to be electric ready. You're going to have to put that infrastructure for future heat pump equipment. Climate zone 16. Not all heat pump technology does well in cold environments when it gets less than 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there are some heat pump technology out there that does great. They're called cold climate heat pump systems. And if you're in climate zone 16, that's what you're going to want to look for. But the Energy Commission doesn't get to codify something that may limit the manufacturer's availability to meet your needs. And because it's only some specific equipment type that works best in climate zone 16 when we're talking about heat pump space heating. They backed up a bit and went, okay, in climate zone 16, you're going to put in an air conditioner. You're like, what? You're going to put in an air conditioner? It's not a choice. No, prescriptively, you're going to put in an air conditioner, and you have the ability to put in a furnace. But then you do still have to do the electric ready, even though the code supports you to put in a gas furnace. If it's 4 habitable stories or greater, now it's climate zones 2 through 15, you're expected to put in a heat pump space heating system or use the performance approach to take a penalty, and it's a double dip penalty because of that source energy, to use gas equipment. Climate zone 1 and 16, what they're supporting now is a dual fuel heat pump. A dual fuel heat pump is a heat pump space heating system. But on those really cold days below 17 degrees Fahrenheit, the backup system is a gas furnace. What? So you're putting in a gas furnace, but you're using it as the secondary supplemental heating source, not the primary. Personally, I would just put in a cold climate heat pump space heating system and call it done, and not go with dual fuel. There's an awful lot of extra cost associated with dual fuel that I would want to avoid. Water heating systems. If you're going to have an individual water heater, one water heater serve each dwelling unit. This is relatively common in garden style multifamily buildings and for low income multifamily buildings where they want all the utilities to be easily corralled to each dwelling unit. You've got what that hot water usage is, the electric and gas use, everything is corralled. You can use a heat pump water heater. Yay! You would have to potentially in climate zone 16 do more because of the fact cold climate zone. So we really want to consider what is it we want to do in climate zone 16 when it comes to water heating. It's something we really have to discuss. You can use an instantaneous gas water heater just like you can in current code. And if you notice, there was no electric ready requirements for multifamily buildings using gas water heating. There is for single family. Spoiler alert, single family wanting to use a gas water heating system will have electric ready requirements. But multifamily buildings wanting to use instantaneous gas equipment for one for each dwelling unit does not have to do the electric ready requirements. Now, central heat pump water heaters are a thing, especially for those of us who are in these reach code cities in which no natural gas is allowed to be connected to the building, or there's extra flexibility measures provided to buildings who decide to go all electric. We've been doing these for a while now. Now, what they've done with the 2022 code is built in a design criteria to these central heat pump water heating systems. And when I say central, that's this water heater or any water heater is serving more than one dwelling unit. So if you have one water heating system serving 2 dwelling units, that's a central system. And it's something to be very conscious of how the energy code looks at those systems and how we show compliance to those systems. I'm not really going to go through all this design criteria with you guys. The biggest thing to be aware of is the primary storage tank. The storage tank sizes are huge because we're slowly heating up water in a heat pump system that we are then making sure we have that volume to meet peak load conditions, and that volume's pretty beefy. And I'm going to have a great recirculation reheat system because of the fact I'm slowly and very energy efficiently heating up water that then I want to make sure stays at a viable temperature as it's being stored and as it's being recirculated around the building, seeing who needs to use that system. If you decide to use a gas central system, remember that's a gas water heating system serving 2 or more dwelling units. The requirements are exactly the same, including the solar thermal requirements. So if you want to use a gas central water heating system for your multifamily building, not only will you have solar thermal requirements, you will also have PV requirements. You'll have both. Oof, that's a little bit of a, wow, what? For heat pump, central heat pump water heating systems, there are no solar thermal requirements and no additional PV requirements because we're already dealing with PV at the building level. We don't need to think about it at here, this mechanical equipment level. But I do need to consider solar thermal in addition to PV systems for my multifamily buildings using central gas systems. I'm not going to do this one with you because I find that individual water heater system design is not standard practice out there. But I do want to start talking about some of the other resources we have available. So one, Dave has put into the chat how to get easy access to the workshop catalog, I want to call it, where you can find more about heat pump technology. And there is a beautiful class. I've taken this class and I love it, that talks about heat pump technology specific to multifamily, talking about not only space heating, but the water heating and what are the different configurations. There's many different ways to do a central heat pump water heating system. It's not just one piece of equipment. It never is going to be just one piece of equipment. It's a designed system with many components. We have a what's new for residential. This is where you can hear about those new envelope requirements that I was talking about and the new mechanical system requirements above and beyond electrification that I did not touch on, and the new indoor air quality requirements associated with kitchen hoods for our multifamily buildings. You can watch that. Our next class will be offered on September 19th. It's about 3 hours long. It's not a whole day commitment, a little bit longer than today, but not too much longer. If you want to know more about the non-residential buildings, that would be on September 12th. They do not talk about multifamily buildings in the non-residential What's New class. Again, that's in the residential What's New. We do have a residential, this is a 2-day class where we really dive deep into what it takes to design properly, not only to the envelope requirements, but to PV and battery. It is 2019 code dependent, but the story is still the same. And we're very much in the process of updating our classes for 2022, but I still think the 2019 class is 100% viable. And I don't know, this November 15th and 16th class will most likely be the 2022 pilot class of the content supporting the next code cycle. So we have more code breakers if you're interested. We have one just on single family, which we touched on a lot today. You're going to know most of that because of what we talked about today. We have one on non-res. We talked about that a lot today when we talked about multifamily. And we have one that just talks about battery and PV as it applies to single family. Here are our what's changed and what's new resources for the 2022 code cycle. These are our fact sheets. The what's new takes that big picture. They're smaller. And they talk about just major things that have changed for the code, and they're the easiest resource to share with your clientele. The what's changed goes line by line through code. These are beefy, these are big. We have one just for multifamily, one just for non-res, one just for single family. And it identifies this code language didn't change. This code language changed, and this is what it changed to. This code language is brand spanking new, and this is now what is newly required. I usually recommend people to really go through this if you are very comfortable with the code, and for those who are in charge of updating your specification and note blocks, this is the tool for you. Q&A says I talked about lots of the common questions that we get, and then they're vetted through the Energy Commission. Pretty much everything we do at Energy Code ACE is vetted by the Energy Commission so that we are on the same page with them. If you've been thinking about going heat pump, now's the time to do it. There are layers upon layers of incentive and rebates out there right now supporting heat pump technology, induction cooktops, and heat pump clothes dryers. Lots of incentives and rebates. And for the first time in a long time, we're able to layer these. You can apply to more than one incentive or rebate, depending upon the program, to support changing out to heat pump technology. Now, once code requires something, we can't incentivize it. So I don't expect this money to be as huge. I mean, I got to tell you, these incentives and rebates are the big chunks of money. And because it also is to help support the infrastructure of updating your panel, which most likely needs to happen as you're adding to the electric load of an existing building. So I'm hoping that you're registered with our website. It's the best way to keep up on all the new stuff that's coming out. We don't send you any email you didn't sign up for, but it might help you keep up on what's going on. Here's my contact information. Oops, Dave, I forgot to replace Jill's name with your name. Maybe Dave can put his contact information in the chat if you'd like to. He's your local program manager of Energy Code ACE through Southern California Edison. And we also do have a survey. We're hoping you guys will take the time to answer. If you wouldn't mind clicking anywhere in this turquoise box before you leave me today, we would very much appreciate getting your feedback on this presentation. Okay, are there any questions I haven't answered? Oh, there is the historic one. Will you touch on historic preservation in Title 24? So if a building or building feature has been qualified as a historic feature, either because it's registered or it's been by local planning, they're saying we want you to save this historic feature or aspect of the building. It is not subject to the energy code. So if I just did a multifamily building, which was in a historic storage building. It's like an old brick building, and they put a bunch of micro units in there. And the existing envelope was brick and single pane metal framed windows, which there's no way in heckola that would meet current code requirements. But because it was a historic building and that facade was considered a qualified historic facade, we got to take exemption for any of the energy code requirements for those walls and for those windows. There's no historic exception to mechanical equipment. Yay, I'm glad you'd like to try and keep that coal burning device, but the energy code ain't going to support that if you're going to replace it. And there are exceptions to historic light fixtures or replica historic light fixtures that you would like to maintain. So there's some nice exceptions associated with historic features of the code, and your local your energy consultant should be up to speed. If they're not, make sure you're always looking for a certified energy analyst to be able to help you understand those historic exceptions. The additions to historic buildings, that's new construction. And I get it, you're trying to make it look like the existing building, but it's new construction. And there are no exceptions to the energy code but I want to look like a historic building. That's when you're going to want to utilize the performance approach and really look at what is it that you want that flexibility on, and how are you going to offset it with other building features to get what you want with your design. But there's no historic exceptions to new construction, including additions. Any other questions out there? We're a little bit after the hour, but I'm here to answer your questions. Remember, this is recorded if I went too fast and you'd like to see it again. You can always have me back.